The city had long stopped breathing by the time the bus turned onto its final stretch, a road slick with midnight rain, glistening beneath the sodium glow of half-dead streetlights. The driver's hands gripped the wheel tighter than habit required. His reflection faintly doubled in the windshield, a ghost steering through the hush. The stops clicked by, each one emptier than the last, until silence filled the aisle like a second presence. Then came the sound. Soft, mechanical, deliberate. The hiss and thud of the bus doors closing behind him, though no one had entered or left. The driver froze. Rain whispered across the glass, yet something colder pressed against his spine, as though the space behind him had learned to breathe. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, and in the momentary darkness the mirrors seemed to hold more than one reflection. The bus groaned forward on its own, metal sighing, the route number flickering to black. Somewhere far down the road, an unseen passenger coughed. The rain eased into a whisper as the bus turned beneath the elevated tracks, the hum of the tires low and uncertain. Every reflection in the windshield moved as expected, except one. The driver's shadow lagged behind his gestures, blinking when he did not, shifting when he sat still. He reached up to adjust the rearview mirror, but the reflection froze, watching him with a calm that chilled the inside of his chest. The street lamps passed like stuttering memories outside, and he felt the pulse of motion beneath him shift. No longer the rhythm of a machine, but of something breathing, slow and patient. The mirror trembled once, and a droplet of condensation slid down its edge like a tear. When he turned the corner, the glass no longer showed his face at all, only the empty aisle behind him. And in the back row, a single seat indented as though someone had just stood up. When the next red light halted him, the hiss of the doors returned, softer this time, deliberate, like something trying to match the rhythm of his breath. He rose, heart hammering, and walked the aisle that smelled faintly of wet iron and dust. There, draped over the last seat, was a glove, soaked, slim-fingered, pale as paper. He lifted it carefully. The leather was still warm. Outside, the rain began again, gentle yet constant, tapping the roof in a pattern that felt too structured to be weather. He turned toward the front, but a single window pane had fogged completely. A faint imprint of a hand pressed from the outside. The glove slipped from his fingers and fell soundlessly to the floor. The light changed. The doors sighed open. No one entered. He didn't remember adding another stop. Yet the console display blinked insistently. Next, Ashcombe Road. The route had no such name. The bus slowed of its own accord, brakes sighing like a weary lung. The stop materialized through fog, a wooden shelter overgrown with ivy. Its bench warped, its sign half buried in vines. No buildings stood nearby, only a stretch of wet earth and silence too deep to belong to a city. The doors hissed open without command. The wind rolled in, carrying the faintest scent of lilacs, out of season, out of place. He stared down the path beside the shelter, its gravel wet with footprints that disappeared into the woods. When he tried to close the doors, they resisted, as if someone invisible still stood between them. He accelerated to escape the silence, the engine roaring in defiance, but beneath its growl came a whisper, faint, rhythmic, threaded through the vibration of the metal frame. It spoke not in words, but in breaths, drawing syllables from the hum of the motor itself. Every corner turned, brought the voice closer, until it resonated directly under his feet, humming his name in a tone lower than hearing. His reflection reappeared in the windshield, lips moving, though his own stayed still. The air thickened, the headlights dimmed, and every sound on the bus condensed into a single pulse. When the next streetlight passed, he saw a figure outside the glass, walking perfectly beside the moving bus, keeping pace, though no road existed there at all. The rain had thinned to mist when he noticed the weight again, subtle but undeniable. On the rear seat, shifting as the bus turned corners, the mirrors reflected nothing, yet the cushion sagged and straightened, a rhythm like breathing, syncopated with his own. He drove faster, the wheels humming over slick asphalt, until the street became unfamiliar, narrow, lined with shuttered shops whose names he couldn't read. His radio crackled softly with static. Then a voice whispered through, gentle, deliberate, forming his route number backward. The air behind him stirred, carrying the faint scent of lilacs once more. His eyes flicked toward the mirror, but before he could look, a voice from the back spoke one word that froze his pulse. "Stop." He turned in disbelief, but she was gone. Only the soft sway of the hanging cord marked where she might have been. Then he saw it, a single coin resting on the fare box, tarnished, heavy, and unfamiliar. Its surface bore an engraving of the bus number and a date, tomorrow's. The rain outside quickened again, smearing reflections across the windshield until the street itself seemed liquid. He reached for the coin, but the moment his fingers brushed the metal, a surge of cold darted up his arm like current. The doors hissed open, unbidden, and the faint shape of the woman appeared in the fog beyond, standing still, facing the bus, her hand outstretched, palm up, waiting. The GPS display had gone blank, its screen pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Every turn he made led to another familiar corner, yet nothing looked quite the same. Buildings rearranged, intersections looping back upon themselves. He passed the same mural 3 times. A painted woman with eyes too lifelike to be art. The bus engine no longer sounded mechanical. It murmured, rising and falling in strange tones that almost formed speech. He tried to pull over, but the steering resisted, turning itself smoothly, as though guided by invisible hands. Street signs flickered past, their letters rearranging until they spelled his name, then dissolving into nonsense. The first knock was faint, almost lost beneath the drone of the engine. Then came another, closer, deliberate. He turned his head slowly toward the left windows, rows of them smeared with condensation, and saw nothing. Then a third knock, this time from behind. The sound echoed like bone against glass. He walked down the aisle, each footstep measured, until he reached the last row. There, a single window pane was fogged from the outside. A handprint appeared, then another beside it, then a third, smaller, pressing gently before fading. His breath fogged the inside as if to answer, and for a second, his reflection smiled back without him. When he turned back toward the driver's seat, she was there again, seated neatly halfway down the aisle, hands folded in her lap, eyes locked on him through the reflection of the windshield. He didn't hear her enter. He didn't hear the doors. The hum of the bus grew deeper, vibrating through the floor as if recognizing her presence. She tilted her head slightly, not in threat, but in quiet expectation. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the city whole, until only their reflections remained. 2 figures suspended between motion and stillness, between the world of passengers and the one that waited when all the stops were done. The bus rolled on, guided now by a rhythm beyond the steering wheel. The windshield shimmered faintly, as if separating 2 worlds. One where he sat breathing, the other just slightly out of sync. His reflection had returned, but it no longer obeyed him. When he leaned forward, it leaned back. When he blinked, it watched. The hum of the engine deepened into something almost melodic, the vibrations forming a low chant that followed the curve of the road. Outside, the city was gone. Only empty streets and repeating intersections surrounded him, every sign pointing toward Depa. The reflection smiled then, slow, deliberate, and lifted a hand in a gesture that wasn't his. The air between them seemed to ripple, and the reflection's mouth formed a word he couldn't hear but felt deep in his chest, as though it had been waiting years to say it. The pavement ahead divided like a forked tongue, both paths marked with the same sign, 47, end of line. The bus hesitated, idling as though listening. He felt the steering wheel twitch under his grip, steering toward the right road despite his resistance. The headlights caught faint movement in the mist, the silhouette of the woman walking steadily down the left path. He tried to follow her, forcing the wheel, but the engine snarled and pulled him back. The 2 roads began to blur together. the horizon bending like glass melting under heat. For a fleeting second he thought he saw both buses, one with him driving alone, one where she sat beside him, each heading opposite directions into the same fog. When the reflection vanished, the silence grew unbearable. Then, faintly, from the windshield's sheen, the shape of another hand appeared gripping the wheel alongside his own. He froze. The metal vibrated not from the road, but from within. His fingers lifted on their own, every joint stiff, marionetted by unseen strings. The reflection of his face warped, younger, expressionless. The same man, but emptied of warmth. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked against the hum. Through the mirror's faint shimmer, the shadow self drove perfectly, guiding the bus with calm assurance while he sat motionless beside it, watching his own body obey a stranger. The radio crackled alive without touch, its static pulsing in a steady rhythm. Beneath it, a voice murmured coordinates, numbers that meant nothing, repeated again and again until they merged into whispers of names. His name, then hers, then another, one he didn't recognize, spoken with reverence. He turned the dial, but each station bled into the same tone, building into a single high pitch that vibrated the windows. Outside, lightning flashed without thunder, revealing the road lined with dozens of motionless buses, identical to his, stretching into darkness. For an instant, their headlights blinked in perfect sync, answering the sound from his radio like a chorus waiting for command. She appeared again in the mirror before she appeared in the seat, as though light remembered her before space did. Her eyes were no longer soft. They gleamed with quiet insistence. The hum of the bus steadied, expectant. "You missed my stop," she said, her voice almost kind. He opened his mouth, but the reflection of himself in the glass turned first, answering for him in a tone he didn't recognize. The lights dimmed, the road ahead brightened with unnatural clarity, and suddenly every turn, every moment of delay, felt orchestrated to lead here. A destination that had never existed on any map. Outside, the fog began to part, revealing something vast, unseen, waiting just beyond the headlights' reach. The headlights cut through the last of the fog, revealing an underpass had never seen before, a tunnel yawning beneath the city's concrete veins. The bus descended on its own, wheels whispering over slick asphalt, lights flickering as if reluctant to follow. The tunnel widened into a terminal, ancient and forgotten, its tiled walls cracked and stained with time. Rows of rusted buses stood silent, their doors open like mouths mid-breath. A pale luminescence hung in the air, neither electric nor natural, illuminating faded timetables whose dates ended decades ago. The radio had gone quiet. Only the faint hiss of air brakes echoed around him, a mechanical sigh repeating at perfect intervals. He stepped onto the platform, and for the first time, the echo that followed was not his own. The terminal stretched in impossible geometry, corners bending subtly wrong, stairways leading nowhere. He approached a timetable mounted on the far wall, its glass smeared with grime. When he wiped it clean, the schedule flickered like a screen, rearranging itself before his eyes. Route numbers blinked in and out, names of streets and districts vanishing to be replaced by words. Return, arrival, no. Exit. The final entry pulsed softly, his name beside the number, 47. He stumbled backward, pulse hammering. From somewhere deep in the tunnel's throat came the hiss of bus doors closing one after another, echoing in sequence like a mechanical heartbeat. A distorted chime rang overhead, the sound of an ancient announcement system sputtering to life. He looked up, waiting for words, but what came was laughter, faint and layered, as if many people whispered through a single throat. Fragments of phrases broke through. All aboard. Last route. Stay seated. He turned toward his bus. But another now idled beside it, identical but cleaner, its windows faintly aglow from within. Figures sat inside, silhouettes in perfect stillness. The intercom clicked again, and this time the voice spoke clearly, low and deliberate. "Your passengers have been waiting." He climbed aboard the glowing bus, its air thick with dust that shimmered like frost in the pale light. Every seat bore a name scratched into its backrest, names he recognized from years past, faces that had ridden his route once, long ago. At the very front, beneath the driver's seat, he found a metal clipboard. The manifest inside was written in looping ink, each entry a date, a name, and a word beside it: departed. His hand trembled as he turned the last page. The final line was blank, but for a single waiting dash, a space for his own. As he stared, the pen lying beside the sheet rolled slowly toward him, its motion perfectly smooth, as though guided by invisible breath. A sound rose from the terminal floor, not mechanical, not human. A low vibration that settled into words beneath his feet. "Take your seat." He turned, and at the far end of the platform, through the drifting fog, the woman in green stood waiting. She no longer appeared spectral, but solid, calm. Her gaze steady as the echo of his own footsteps filled the emptiness between them. Behind her, the pristine bus's headlights flared to life. She lifted her hand and pointed toward the driver's seat. The old intercom crackled once more, and this time, the voice that spoke was his own. Layered, hollow, commanding. Route complete. The engine awoke with a sigh that didn't belong to machinery. Every light within the bus shimmered pale gold, and for the first time, the hum beneath his feet felt warm, almost human. The tunnel stretched forward into a horizon of dim light, more suggestion than distance. He looked toward the open platform, but Clara was gone. Only the faint trace of her perfume lingered, mingled with the scent of rain. He sat in the driver's seat, hands resting lightly on the wheel, feeling the quiet recognition of something ending. The console blinked once. Route 47, return. The doors closed of their own accord. As the bus began to roll forward, the terminal behind him dimmed until it vanished completely, leaving only a narrow beam of pale illumination ahead. A road that felt both endless and intimate, like memory, unfolding in real time. As the bus moved deeper into the glowing passage, faint silhouettes began to appear in the seats, not solid but luminous, shaped by memory more than form. He recognized their outlines. A boy who once thanked him for waiting, an elderly woman who always sat by the window, a man who never spoke but always smiled. Each figure radiated soft light, faces serene, gazes fixed forward. The bus carried them in silence, its motion slow, reverent, like a vessel crossing a river of still air. Their presence didn't frighten him. Instead, it filled him with a quiet ache, a certainty that these were not ghosts but echoes of journeys unfinished. When he looked at their reflection in the mirror, he saw only light. No faces at all, only the shimmer of those who once trusted him to drive them home. The light ahead grew stronger, breaking into beams that cut through a curtain of mist. Beyond it stood what looked like a terminal, but its architecture was impossible. Stairways leading upward into clouds, glass walls reflecting skies that changed hue every second. He slowed the bus, but there was no ground. Only an endless expanse of calm brightness that supported the wheels as if light had density. A voice whispered from the aisle behind him, gentle, familiar. Everyone off. He turned to see the seats empty once more, yet faint footprints glowed momentarily where the passengers had been. Each mark faded into the floor like candle smoke, leaving behind a peace so deep it bordered on silence. She appeared one final time at the foot of the glowing stairway, her form clear and calm, no longer the trembling shade of the midnight route. Her green coat fluttered gently in the still air as if moved by a breeze from nowhere. When she spoke, her voice carried neither echo nor tone, only the steady rhythm of meaning itself. "The route ends when you let it," she said. He wanted to ask where she came from, what she wanted, why him, but every word dissolved before reaching his tongue. Instead, he nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of duty fulfilled. Her faint smile answered everything he couldn't say. Then, like the last flicker of a match, she vanished into the gold. When the light receded, dawn had taken its place. The bus emerged onto an empty street washed clean by rain, the sky flushed pale with morning. Storefronts were shuttered, puddles calm, the hum of the city not yet awake. The console still glowed faintly, but the display was blank. He drove without purpose now, letting the wheels trace familiar roads that felt lighter than before. The air inside carried no trace of the night, only stillness, the scent of ozone, and the faint memory of lilacs. When he reached the depot, the doors opened quietly, obediently. He turned off the ignition. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. He woke in the driver's seat, unsure if he had ever left it. The depot shimmered faintly in the morning haze. Too still, too perfect. The puddles outside hadn't moved. The clouds hadn't shifted. He checked his watch. Its second hand ticked backward, steady and unhurried. The radio remained silent, save for the faint hum of static like distant breathing. He started the engine out of instinct, not intention, and the console flickered back to life. Route 47 glowed once more, followed by a single word beneath it. Repeat. His chest tightened. The mirrors caught the sunlight wrong. Instead of reflecting brightness, they swallowed it, leaving only shadows that trembled as the bus doors closed on their own, sealing him into the familiar hum of motion. He drove through streets that looked right but felt wrong. Buildings standing taller than memory. Windows too dark for daylight. The intersections had the same names, yet each turn looped back to where he began. A newspaper on the curb bore a date that had not yet arrived. He slowed the bus beside a familiar corner cafe, but its interior was hollow, every chair perfectly arranged, cups steaming though no one had touched them. He stepped outside, calling into the silence, his own voice bouncing back a fraction late, as though the city needed time to remember how to echo. When he looked toward the bus again, it was gone, replaced by another, identical with its headlights already on. The sound came from behind the cafe, a low hum turning slowly into words. "You missed your return." The voice was neither male nor female, yet it carried warmth that unnerved him. He followed the sound to a narrow alley, where rainwater pooled like mirrors. In each reflection, he saw himself standing at different ages. A young man laughing, a middle-aged version staring back, and an older one turning away. They all moved independently, their lips forming silent phrases he couldn't hear. Then the voice spoke again, closer now, whispering directly into his ear. "You've been driving in circles longer than you remember." He turned sharply, but only the empty air trembled with the echo. When he stepped back onto the street, the second bus waited with doors open, idling quietly. Inside, everything was identical. The seat indentations, the faint scratch marks, even the smell of rain. But the driver was already there. Himself. The other Elias looked calm, composed, his hands steady on the wheel. Their eyes met through the windshield, and for a moment, time folded inward. The second, him smiled faintly and gestured toward the empty seat beside the driver's console. Without knowing why, he obeyed. The hum deepened. The city outside blurred until it became a wash of silver light. Two buses, two reflections, one moving forward, while the other stayed perfectly still. He sat beside himself as the bus rolled into a corridor of light, so vast it erased perspective. The hum of the engine merged with his heartbeat until they were indistinguishable. The second him turned, eyes hollow yet kind, and spoke a single sentence that echoed without sound. Someone must always drive. The world outside dissolved into pure motion, endless, steady, without destination. He watched as his reflection placed its hand on the wheel, the light consuming both of them until all that remained was the faint hiss of air, brakes releasing into eternity. The bus kept going, carrying its unseen passengers along a road that was no longer made of asphalt, but memory. The hum faded into silence as the bus slowed to a stop. There was no tunnel, no city, only a platform stretching into infinity, lined with faint lights that pulsed like distant heartbeats. The air was cool, but not cold, the kind that carried the scent of rain long after the storm had passed. He stepped outside and found no shadow beneath him, only light. Rows of buses extended in both directions, identical and motionless, their windows gleaming softly. In each one, he caught glimpses of figures, reflections of himself, some seated, some standing, all waiting. When he tried to speak, their mouths moved in perfect unison, forming words he couldn't hear but somehow understood. "It's your stop now." At the far edge of the platform stood a man in an old conductor's uniform, his cap dusted with age, his expression serene and knowing. The insignia on his coat shimmered faintly. 47. He held no ticket puncher, only a small brass key dangling from a thin chain. When Elias approached, the man smiled, a gesture both familiar and foreign, as if borrowed from a forgotten dream. "Been a long route," he said softly, the words blending into the wind. The conductor turned toward the endless line of buses, gesturing toward one whose headlights had just begun to glow. "They're waiting for their driver," he murmured, and though Elias wanted to ask who they were, he already knew. The conductor handed him the key, its metal warm against his palm, and pointed toward the bus whose interior shimmered like memory caught in sunlight. "Every route needs its keeper," the man said. Elias hesitated, staring at the open doors. They seemed to lead both inward and outward, at once, reflections folding over themselves like mirrored water. He stepped closer, feeling the subtle pull of gravity and time unspooling around him. Through the glass, he saw not seats but corridors of light twisting endlessly, whispering fragments of every voice that had ever spoken on his bus. He placed his foot on the first step, and the whispering stopped. The silence that followed felt like acceptance as he sat once more behind the wheel, everything aligned. The hum of the engine, the distant pulse of the lights, the stillness in his chest. Outside the windshield, the platform dissolved into a road suspended in midair, winding through clouds that shimmered like liquid glass. The route marker above him flickered softly. 47 completed. He understood then that the journey had never been about the city or its passengers, but the act of carrying them through their own endings, the last ride before. Silence. He exhaled, the motion natural, certain. The doors closed gently, and for the first time, he smiled. The horizon ahead burst into dawn, a brightness beyond sunlight, vast and soundless. The bus glided forward, slowing as if reluctant to finish. The console lights dimmed, the hum fading into still air. When it stopped, there was no platform, no city, only a boundless plain of golden mist. He stood and looked back one final time, the seats behind him empty, the air serene. Then a faint echo rippled through the silence, the soft closing of doors, familiar and final. He stepped away from the bus, leaving it idling in quiet eternity. The mist parted, and the first warmth of morning touched his face. For the first time since the night began, he was no longer driving.